And we'll kick things off. Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Asiri. I'm founder and CEO of Executive Presence. We work with tech CEOs on LinkedIn visibility. About half of the clients that we work with and executives work with are in the software and technology space. Today, I'm going to talk about something most tech companies ignore until it's too late, and I want to use real data to make the case. In terms of what we'll cover today, I'll start by just defining a term, the visibility gap. I think that's the primary problem that we're trying to help solve today. I'll then share with you three mistakes that I've seen across 400 different executives and four mindset shifts that help them overcome those mistakes. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time in the four different case studies. A story of a client we worked with that sold for 2 billion, another of our clients that IPO'd for 6 billion, two other case studies that illustrate common points that we see in the software space. Lastly, I'll share a framework for how you can think about using public perception and LinkedIn in particular to help grow your organization. And I'll try to keep 10 to 15 minutes at the end for any questions that you have. Feel free as we go along. We have a small group today. If you want to throw your questions in the chat pane, happy to answer those as we go along. So just to give you some quick context on me, I spent 5 years as a junior officer on board nuclear submarines, went to Stanford, got my MBA. I'm a three-time founder with 2 exits. At this point, I've worked with about 400 leaders from seed stage to public companies, helping them shape how they show up on LinkedIn. And as I said, our largest vertical is software and technology, which is why I'm excited about today's discussion. So the pattern that I see over and over again is that your investors have a dashboard. Your board can read about your metrics, but your next hire, your next customer, your next acquirer, they're Googling you right now. And what are they finding? The default for most of the tech CEOs that I start working with is to invest obsessively in product and engineering and go to market. But their personal visibility, the visibility of their leadership team gets treated as an afterthought, something that they want to address later. And that approach works really well pre-Series A. At that point, your personal network is your distribution channel, and warm intros tend to close every deals. You don't need visibility because everyone already knows you. But there is a breaking point, and it stops working the moment you need to reach people who don't already know you. And that moment arrives usually much earlier than most founders expect. And it's not just my opinion. The research backs this up. 73% of decision makers say that thought leadership is more trustworthy than marketing materials. That's from Edelman and from LinkedIn. 81% of B2B buyers already have a preferred vendor before their first conversation with a sales rep, which is crazy. 81%. That means that the deal is being won or lost before your sales team even gets in the room. And then 75% say thought leadership prompted them to research a product or service they weren't previously considering. 97% of recruiters use LinkedIn to find and evaluate candidates. So your buyers, your hires, your investors, your acquirers, they're already looking, and the question is what they find. So the three mistakes that I see before we get into the case studies, I see tech CEOs making these mistakes over and over again. First mistake, I'll post when we have news. That leads to sporadic company announcements that earn 12 likes on social media, where an algorithm rewards consistency, not events. And by the time you have news, you have no audience to share it with. So the distribution channel has to be built in advance of having the news. Mistake number 2 that I hear a lot, our marketing team handles social. Company pages on LinkedIn, they earn a fraction of the reach of personal profiles. 59% of decision makers prefer content from individual creators over brands, and your brand page cannot replicate what your voice alone can do. Third mistake that I hear often is I don't have time for this, and the reframe really is simple here. You don't have time not to do this. Your competitors, CEOs, are building audiences while you remain invisible, and the actual commitment is realistically 30 to 60 minutes a month. So not a content calendar, you manage yourself, but we'll come back to that. So the compound effect, this is something that people about LinkedIn that most people get wrong. It compounds just like product market fit does. So months 1 through 3 are typically you're laying a foundation. The early posts that you do on a platform like LinkedIn will get very little traction, but you're building the habit, you're building the voice. Silence is pretty normal here. This is where most of the CEOs I see quit. They get really fired up, they put things out there, and then they give up before they ever see the returns. Months 6 through 9 are really about finding your voice. This is where the consistency starts to create momentum. The algorithm begins to recognize and reward you, and your audience starts to grow. And then months 12 and beyond is the inflection point. Momentum really drives the inbounds. That's hires, investors, customers, acquirers. They're reaching out to you. They already know you when they do so. Your audience starts to grow, and that compound effect is now visible. The CEOs that I've consistently seen who win, they showed up every week for 12 plus months. And I'll show you what that looks like in each of the four tech CEO case studies we'll get into here in a second. One last thing before we go into the case studies, I do pretty consistently see four mindset shifts that occur in about the 250 plus tech CEOs that I've worked with out of the 400 CEOs overall. And I will go through them one by one. Shift number one, you have to stop talking about your product. You have to start sharing your point of view. Most tech CEOs, I'd say 90 plus percent of the ones I've worked with, they default to product content. That's feature announcements, tech deep dives. The problem is that your LinkedIn audience doesn't care about your product the way that you do. One post trying to make multiple technical points just gets scrolled past. The rule that we use internally is this product content should be 20% or less of what you talk about on a platform like LinkedIn. And even that 20% should be framed through the lens of something human and strategic. That's team stories behind the build, company milestones and what they mean, the origin story of the problem you're solving, why this mission matters to you personally. That's one I would underscore and put in bold. And the perspective outperforms product every single time. We'll see that carried through in the data here in a second. The second shift is it's often CEOs are thinking about this more just in the terms of sales, and we really have to change the mindset to think about more than sales, to actually think bigger. Early stage founders are hyper focused on their pipeline. It's really understandable. I get that. I've been there myself and I continue to be there at times. But if you desire to drive exits or IPOs or category leadership, you really need to stop thinking of LinkedIn and publicity in general as a sales channel. You need to start thinking of it instead as your brand platform. It's a hiring channel. Key talent finds you. It's an investor channel. VCs research you before your first meeting. Your narrative either builds the bull case or leaves a vacuum. It builds your brand. CEO thought leadership outlasts any single sales deal, and it does build your overall story. A 12-month active archive of content is a narrative asset for acquirers and analysts and press who look you up. The example that we'll go through today that most illustrates this point for me is one of my clients I've worked with for 4 years now, private and then public. When he IPO'd, he had built up that muscle of storytelling. He had built up that muscle of knowing which points resonated with his audience because he'd been doing this for so long on LinkedIn. And I think most of us aspire to be in that position of going public or having a huge exit or defining a category, but you really have to find your voice before you get there. The third shift is the keynote test. So if I'll often ask clients and prospects, like if you had a keynote slot in a room full of your target audience, who do you put on stage? I like to ask that question because it usually solves for the person who has the experience, the network, and the proclivity to be out in front, out in public. So for most growth stage companies, 95% of the time it's the CEO or the founder. But the question is worth asking. It's not always true. There might be someone else within your organization who has more of an inclination to be on stage, maybe more notoriety, a deeper network, or deeper expertise. And that's the things that you need. You really need someone with experience, that deep domain expertise your audience will respect. You need someone with a network, those existing connections that seed that initial reach. And then obviously the willingness, which is not always there, that genuine desire and organizational mandate to be the public face of the company. And one last point on the willingness before we move on. Most CEOs, and I meet with about 500 CEOs a year. Most CEOs do not want the spotlight. They do not want the attention. This is not why they started their company. That's even more pronounced in the tech space. The reframe there that I'll often give them around willingness is this is something that they are enduring in service of their organization. And that usually helps them get past this. It's not about them. It's not about their vanity, but this is a bazooka they can bring to the fight to provide air coverage for their sales team, to help their recruiting team, to help them with fundraising, to kind of help the organization writ large. This is about enduring that to the benefit of the organization. And most founders, most CEOs are willing to tolerate quite a lot if they're bought in to this actually impacting them in a way that they want. So, last shift, and then we'll get into the case studies. This one's really important. It's not just about being authentic, and this is something that I think in my early days at the company I got wrong. It's about being strategic, not just authentic. So everyone does say be authentic, and that's table stakes. I think that's certainly required to show up here. But the real question is, what perception are you building? How do you want to be perceived in the market? How are you differentiated from your competitors? I'll give you one quick real example here. I work with a client. This person sells to healthcare executives, mainly 50-year-old male decision makers. This founder dropped out of college to start his company. It's an extremely compelling, incredible founder story, but we do not tell that story on LinkedIn because the perception he needs is trustworthy, established, reliable expert. And that doesn't go along with most people with the initial thought of college dropout. And so it isn't just about authenticity that is required, but it is going beyond that to think through of like, what is the public perception we want to actively cultivate here? So authenticity without strategy is just a diary, and strategy without authenticity is marketing. You really need both of those to win. All right, we'll get into the case studies. This is where I want to spend the bulk of our time, and feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go along here. But I will make at least 10 minutes of space at the end. So we're going to go through four different case studies, four different strategies. There is a common thread across them. We'll talk about, I've anonymized all of these as with our work with all of our clients. But the first one I'll call the exit. It's a healthcare software CEO with about 800 employees. They were acquired for over $2 billion. The second one we'll go through, I'll call the platform builder, enterprise software CEO, about 5,000 employees. They IPO'd at over $6 billion. The third one we'll call the talent magnet. It's an education technology CEO. They've raised nearly 30 million in funding. He's really compelling story of how he's turned LinkedIn into his best recruiting tool. And then the Evangelist, and this is a consumer software founder. He's raised about 150 million. He's built trust with conservative financial institutions simply through evangelism, and I really view him as a role model in evangelism. It's why I tend to wear executive presence branded clothing 24/7. I learned that lesson from him. So we'll go through these one at a time. First case study is the exit. So this is a PE-backed company. The client is a CEO. They've got about 800 employees. They're backed by over 100 billion in combined assets under management to speak to the quality of their investors. This CEO has extreme deep domain expertise. He was specifically brought in by the sponsors to scale and exit the company, which he did. But when we started with him, there was virtually no digital presence despite extremely credible background in person. So when we started to work together, he had about 5 posts in the last year, minimal traction on those. When we Googled him prior to working with him, we found a LinkedIn profile and a company bio. That was pretty much it. So this was a CEO perfectly positioned for a landmark exit, but when anyone looked him up, they didn't find anything. What changed over the course of 18 months? It wasn't overnight. Over the course of 18 months, he was posting 20 times a month. So that was 5 times a year to about 240 posts a year. His top posts were pulling in about 400 likes or more. And he went from invisible to really the category leader, the primary voice in his category. That preceded his company being acquired by a Fortune 500 company for over $2 billion. When that acquirer was doing their due diligence and looking at them, they found a thought leader, not just a ghost. And the LinkedIn narrative became part of the overall acquisition story. I think one of the two key insights here for me is that visibility is not built when you want it. Visibility is not built when you have a product launch, a key hire, a major round of funding, an exit. It's really built 24 months leading up to that. You cannot turn this on, unfortunately, when you need it. And I do get a lot of people coming to me wanting to make a big splash in weeks or months. And the truth is that that's certainly not optimal and often not possible. And so the audience has to be built first. I'll plant a seed on this one, even though it's not on the slide. I also think, and we can talk about this more in the Q&A, this CEO in particular is a great example. You know, when we talk about tech CEOs always thinking about sales, I actually think, from my perspective, his primary focus was attracting and retaining talent. And you know, you have an organization of over 800 employees. The challenge is then, how do you keep everyone on the same page? How do you keep everyone aligned on the mission and the vision and values? This person very adeptly used LinkedIn as one of many channels. It's not the cure-all, but one of many channels to be communicating to his team spread around the globe. And I think that that's an underutilized view of LinkedIn, is that way as a leader to be relentless and boring and consistent on the things that matter most for your organization to hear, both internal and external stakeholders. So we can talk about that more in the Q&A if you'd like. Second case study, this one I'm calling the platform builder. To give you some context, it was a founder and CEO. The enterprise software company, they have about 5,000 employees. We worked with him for about 2 years while he was private, and then 2 years since he has been public. The thing that I find really compelling here is that before we started working together 4 years ago, this CEO was actually really active on LinkedIn. He was posting 18 times a month, which some of my clients don't even post that frequently. That is way more than your typical executive. So the challenge in this case was not getting him to post. He was already adept at that. The challenge, quite frankly, was getting him to be human. When we analyzed his content, about 52% of his content was industry commentary. That's very safe. It's very professional. It's also very forgettable. So he was basically a commentator, not a leader. He was telling people what was happening in his industry, but he wasn't telling people about who he was. And so we shifted that mix in our work together. When we started working with him, he actually started posting less, 14 times a month instead of 18, but impressions went up 71%. His engagement rate went up 52%. The personal content, the stories about his journey and his values, and in some cases his life outside of work, those drove 2.5 times the reach of his industry posts. And I will get in at the end to the framework. I'm not just saying just do personal content. That doesn't work. But this really is about a content portfolio. He IPO'd at over $6 billion. And when investors and analysts researched his company during the roadshow, his thought leadership reinforced the bull case. He wasn't just a founder, he was a category authority. That is one part him learning to do that and learning to be in front of the public and in that scrutiny and learning to tell the story, and one part having a pretty long trail of evidence that he knew what he was doing and had, very, very big following and a lot of content supporting his expertise and what differentiated his organization. So overall here, less content, but better content mix and dramatically better results. And I'll give you a shortcut in the framework section at the end of how to think about that. Okay, third one. I actually love this one. I'll call it the talent magnet. This is a CEO. It's an ed tech company. They've raised about $30 million. He's done 520 over 520 posts in the last 2 years. So that's about 5 posts per week sustained, which is pretty exemplary. The challenge that he was facing was attracting top talent in a hyper competitive market where every startup posts the same "we're hiring" content. So he needed to stand out not just by posting job listings, but by showing what it actually means to work at his company. His breakthrough came not from a recruiting post, but from extremely polarizing leadership opinions. He posted about, like, just as an example, get rid of unlimited PTO. It got nearly 1,800 likes, 400 plus comments. This is someone who was not shy about stepping into controversy. But I think what I respect about him, it was not controversy for controversy's sake. It was about acting as a filter. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the numbers across his program, his comments went up 133%. A lot of that driven by the polarizing nature of his content. Quarterly engagement nearly doubled. His funding announcement was seen by millions of people versus thousands or hundreds. And the strategic insight, I think, is really powerful. His most liked posts were not job listings. They were polarizing leadership opinions. The people who agreed with him became his next hires. The people who disagreed with him were never going to work with him in the first place. So this content became a very effective filter, attracting the right people and repelling the wrong ones faster than any recruiting funnel. We can double click on this in the Q&A. I think there's so much here that's valuable. I think my judgment, and I meet with a lot of CEOs a year, and I'm like this as well. A lot of us don't want the negative attention. We do not want to court controversy. And I think that tends to lead to lukewarm leadership and lukewarm public presence. Let's be all things to all people. Let's not be off-putting. Let's say the right thing. Let's be a good boy. I think that this is a really compelling example. This person talks about a very strong hustle culture, how he doesn't care about work-life balance, how he wants people who are bought in to the mission and the cause. He can get away with that in an education space, but they're so bought into the mission that it won't come at the personal expense of their health and life. I wouldn't want to work there, but he's not trying to hire me, right? This is someone who knows their DNA very well. He knows the culture that he wants to build intentionally, and he is okay with 95% of the world hating him and judging him and disagreeing with him because he's looking for that 5% that is the right fit for him, and his head count's up 300% last time I checked in the last 2 years. He's very good at finding those people, but that by nature means turning away the people who are not going to be bought in the first place. And so for this person, if you were to Google them, you're going to find a leader with a very clear and unapologetic point of view. It's not a generic careers page. And when that funding announcement dropped, the audience was already built. And again, that distribution preceded the announcement. Again, we'll get into this in the framework. I am not advocating that all of you are polarizing or intentionally pushing people away. I think obviously this has to be authentic to who you are, in alignment with what the organization is doing. But for an organization that is overtly trying to disrupt a space, overtly trying to think differently, overtly trying to generate attention, it plays well into that strategy to court controversy. And I admire this founder for judiciously telling the story in a way that is very off-putting to the right people to be off-putting to. He's very precise in his messaging, which we can get into more in the Q&A section. All right, last case study. This is a founder and CEO in an estate planning software company. They've raised over $150 million. They're backed by several major financial institutions. They've got over 30,000 advisors on the platform. He's posted nearly 600 times in 4 years. This is a great example. This is a category where trust is everything. Probably one of the more extreme examples I can think of where trust matters, though I would argue it probably matters in all of our businesses. But trust is everything here. So how does a young founder build credibility with conservative financial institutions? The answer here applies here, but I think it applies to many of you. The answer is don't sell the product. It's evangelize the mission. So the results over 4 years, his average likes per post are up 92%, comments are up 120%, total quarterly engagement up 156%. Just using this to illustrate that this with consistency, the results compound. LinkedIn is definitely a compound game. One proof point, his highest performing content never mentions the product. It's a funding announcement with over 1,000 likes. The birth of a child, over 1,000 likes, which I'm not saying, I'm not espousing this for all of you of holding your kid up for views, but when your business is estate planning and that's a big part of your personal mission, certainly is on brand. Paternity leave reflection had over 1,000 likes. The personal content and the mission-driven content massively outperform anything about the product itself. And the best founder content never mentions the product. It tells the story of the why the company exists. It lets the audience connect the dots. When his major investors came in, they bet on a founder who had already built a trusted audience. That's a major asset from his investor standpoint. And LinkedIn was part of that due diligence story. I have a healthcare webinar coming up on April 15th, and I think that honestly in the healthcare space, mission plays an even bigger role than in the software space. I think it's one of the advantages healthcare companies have and that I've seen with our clients. But I do want to plug that here for all of you that if you have a strong why for why you are building your tech company, if you have a strong mission, I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but that is gasoline to throw on the fire for everything, funding, hiring, sales, everything. If you can champion that mission in person, on Slack, in emails, and on LinkedIn, it is such a compelling competitive advantage. I think we all know instinctively that we want to follow a leader who has a very strong personal connection to whatever they're doing. And so if that's true for you, I really suggest you lead with that. It will differentiate you from your competitors. It will shape the perception of you having more fuel in the gas tank because you have such a strong tie to the problem that you're solving. All right. So four different case studies. I'll pull the thread for you. What do all four have in common? First and foremost, consistency. All four posted 2 to 5 times per week for 12 plus months before seeing those compound returns. I think that this is a strategic investment. I think it indicates across all four of these, they're strategic thinkers, they're long-term thinkers. That applied to their LinkedIn game as well. There are no shortcuts, none that will last, no viral hacks. This is about showing up week after week. There is strategy here, and we'll talk about that in the framework piece. It's not just blindly posting, but consistency matters a lot. Second is personal voice. None of them sound like like press releases. Every post sounds like an actual person talking, not a brand broadcasting. It doesn't feel like it's a billboard with legs. That is one of the biggest corrections we usually do when we work with a CEO. This is not press release. And if you look at those four different examples, they sound and show up and look very different. This does have a component of authenticity. That's part of the differentiation, but they have a very strong personal voice. Third one, they're all company sponsored. This was not a side hustle for any of them. It was a strategic initiative with resources behind it, ghostwriting strategy, dedicated time. Whether you do this in-house, whether you work with someone like us, it really is important that you give it the resources to see the results. Fourth one, content matched strategy, exit visibility, IPO positioning, talent attraction, mission evangelism. In each case, the content was serving a specific business goal. In none of those cases was it purely sales. And I'm kind of simplifying this. Most of them were a blend of goals. We can talk about the most common goals I see, but just at a high level, that's usually sales, business development, hiring, retaining talent, fundraising, M&A, whether you're buying organizations or being bought, brand building. I think it works best if you're focusing on all five of those. And if you're trying to create a category or build a company of sufficient scale, you will have to focus on all five of those, not just the sales, which is usually when people come to us. Um, and then fifth one, product content or company promotional content. It's 20% or less. The rest was perspective, culture, mission, personal stories, less product, more person, consistently across all four case studies. All right, I'm going to give you a content framework, and then I want to make sure I get at least 10 minutes for the Q&A. So the content framework here is what I use as a starting point with most companies that we work with. I'll caveat this by saying that the great thing about LinkedIn is that over time, we can use performance data and audience data to really refine this mix and get even more nuanced and precise. But as a starting point, it will generally look something like this. I'll go through them one at a time. The first and biggest is industry thought leadership. Usually, that will be about 40% of the initial content strategy. This is really the credibility base. Your point of view on where the market is going. This is where I want you showing up as a generous teacher. One of the frameworks we'll use is kind of the Venn diagram. What do you know that you could speak about with authority? And what does your target audience care about? What keeps them up at night? That intersection is where we start for the industry thought leadership. A question I'll often ask someone is if you had an hour keynote speech to give in front of your target audience, but if you mention your product or your company, they will pull the mic from you. What do you talk about for an hour that builds your credibility with this audience? And that's generally the buckets of things that we'll start with. And also just as an aside on this, you're already doing this. Like you're probably rattling things off the top of your head with your team, with prospects, with your clients, with your investors. If you were to just have a voice recorder or one of those limitless devices or something recording you, it would probably pick up on the patterns of things that you're talking about. Great. Let's bring that to LinkedIn where your internal and external stakeholders are there to an extent more than anything else, any other location. Second bucket, I call leadership and career journey. That's generally 30% of the starting point. This is really the trust builder. This is your story, your failures, what you've learned. This is where people start to feel like they know you. I love the career journey stuff, especially, if you're a 19-year-old tech founder, you still have them, but, a little bit more common the older you get. But this is where we want to mine your story. This could be high school, this could be college, this could be a first job, failures, what you learned, people who influenced you, milestones that shaped you. Stories are kind of the bacon on LinkedIn. You wrap a story, wrap bacon around anything, it's a lot easier to digest. Same thing with the lessons. And I think especially as AI is becoming more and more common and flooding the news feed, leading with personal experience is a great differentiator. Hey, I built and sold three companies. Here's one mistake I made. Hey, I took revenue from zero to 100,000 in 6 months. Here's three things I learned. That's a little bit more formulaic, but the example there is leading with the story to give credibility to you and relatability. Third one, company promotion. Again, 20% or less of the content. Team wins, milestones, culture. These are recruiting ads that don't look like recruiting ads. Common ways that I would recommend to do this is, again, stories. Spotlight a team. It shows the type of leader that you are. You spotlight an employee, the value that they embody, but it also shows that you're a leader who knows their team, is willing to spotlight them. Origin stories, things like that. Obviously, trying to avoid the so humbled to be featured by Fortune or whatever else that's so generic. And then last one, work adjacent or personal, about 10% of the content. This is your values, your family, your life outside of the company. It's the smallest category across the board. It's the reach multiplier. That will generally be the best performing post you'll ever do. The quick hack for me on this one is if you were at a dinner table surrounded by prospective clients and investors and employees, what do you talk about over drinks that's not work? That's generally your litmus test for hobbies, politics, religion, family. It's pretty divisive and there's no universally right answer there. But when I ask that of CEOs, there are some that will want to talk about their kids and some that would never talk about their kids. No right or wrong, but that's kind of a good authenticity filter for should you be sharing this on LinkedIn. But I think if it's done in a genuine way, authentic way, it really humanizes you and shows you as a three-dimensional person. And that's a lot easier to attract people and be seen and understood. And people want to know who they're working for and working with. All right. So one thing before we get into the Q&A, and I got 9 minutes left for that. Biggest objective, I don't have time. You can do this in-house. I can talk to you about how to equip your team to do this. We do it as a company for a living. Generally, that's going to be 30 to 60 minutes per month of your time. So 6 to 12 hours a year. If it produces one enterprise deal, one key executive hire, one investor conversation, one acquisition discussion, the ROI on your time is orders of magnitude. So, and anyone doing it this at scale, they're not doing it on their own. They're not writing their own posts. It's simply not only is it time wise inconceivable for you to invest the time to do it, but having an outsider to pull the insights from you and to tell you and be really candid with you about, I don't think you should talk about that, or like, wait, tell me more. Most of the best insights for my content, for our clients' content, it's not stuff we instinctively know about ourselves. Having someone outside the organization, I think, is an asset, but you can certainly do it inside the organization. And I can ask about that. I can talk about that in Q&A. Okay. Happy to chat about this all offline, but let me just open this up for questions. If you have anything, there is a Q&A for me, it shows up in the More tab. For all of you, I don't know what it might be, but if there's any questions, please put them in there. I'll answer that. Feel free. I'll send the recording after this. Feel free to reply to that email. It does come straight to me. Happy to trade emails, hop on a call to answer your questions as well. I'll give it another 20 seconds or so if there are any questions there. But while that wraps up, I will send a survey right after this. Would love your honest and direct feedback. How can I do better? We're doing a lot more of these webinars, so let me know the topics that interest you. We're actively researching those all the time and would love to research the questions that keep you up at night. Not seeing any questions. Thank you all for joining. I'll send you that replay shortly, and feel free to reach out if there's any other weekends for you. Take care.